A very warm welcome to you all to another live Action for Happiness event. My name is Mark Williamson, and it's just such a joy to see thousands of you joining us again for another of these really engaging conversations. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you particularly to Dr. Rick Hanson, who's joining us as our special guest today. Hello, Rick. Lovely to see you.
Mark, it's great to be here, and I'm just floored by the people. I took a quick peek at the chat and saw all these people, coming in, and so I just feel really honored in this internet commons that we have with everyone to be able to be here.
It's such a joy, and I think we've had over 250,000 people join us for one of these live events since we've been hosting them. So thank you for putting on and being here for another great topic, actually. Resilient well-being, we've called this. And of course, there's so much scope for us to talk about, but I'm sure most of you joining today will be familiar with Rick's fantastic work, a best-selling author, a psychologist, involved in so many great initiatives, and I'm hoping we'll talk about at least some of them in this conversation. So in a moment, I'll allow Rick to say a bit more about his background and what brought him to this whole area. But just for any of you who are new to one of these events, thank you for being here. It'll be hopefully a stimulating conversation, but also a chance for you to engage, to share your ideas in the chat. We'll be doing a few interactive exercises, and please do use the Q&A function to put any questions you'd like to put to Rick after we've had a sort of conversation about this theme to start with. But why don't we start, Rick, with a bit about you and your background and why resilient well-being seems so relevant right now.
Ah. Well, I've thought a lot about this. Where did it all start? And I invite people to consider for themselves what I'm about to say, which is I think many people, when they're little, like your earliest memories, 3, 4, 10, for me at least, in the background of them was this wistful awareness that there was a lot of unnecessary unhappiness. I grew up in a kind of ordinary middle class American suburban environment, nothing horrible, not like so many people face. And still there was a lot of stress and fussing and bickering and anxiety and hassling. And then I watched how the grown-ups were with each other, and I watched how other kids were with each other. And in the back of my mind and feeling was this sense, why? There's got to be a better way. I was a little kid. I didn't know what to do about it, but that feeling was rested there in the heart. And I think it's really helpful to go back to the things that we knew in our bones when we were little. And that kind of set me on my way. And then another turning point was when I was an absolutely unhappy and miserable teenager, really neurotic, shy. I was very young going through school. I felt like an outsider, like a total loser. And around age 15, when it all seemed hopeless, I suddenly realized that, yeah, I could not change the past, but I could always learn a little every day. I could always get a little more healed, a little more comfortable, a little wiser. I could understand people a little better. I could not freak out when a girl smiled at me. I could not, get so caught up on my parents. And that idea of learning broadly, healing, growing, even awakening, became a guiding principle because, of course, that's our superpower. It's the one we use to grow all the other powers that we have. It's the strength of strengths. So that too set me kind of on my way. And it seemed like what was really important to learn was not so much how to do trigonometry, it was how to learn to be strong and loving and happy and increasingly wise, even in ordinary practical ways. That set me on my way. And then gradually over time, I got interested in the combination of modern psychology, ancient contemplative wisdom, and then over the last couple decades, especially the explosion of knowledge about our own brain. When you combine neuroscience, psychology, and contemplative practice, that is a really power-packed combination. And that's been the basis for my professional work ever since.
Amazing. And I've been a big fan of and follower of your work and your fantastic writings and books and so on. So thank you for all you've been doing already, and I look forward to diving into it. But before we go into some practices we might try together and some of your particular insights, why don't we reflect a little bit, Rick, on the context right now? There are so many of us, I think, feeling really swept along by a situation either in our personal lives, but also as we look around us in the world where we feel a bit overwhelmed. And I guess there are things going on inside each of us, but there's also things going on around each of us that we are perhaps quite valid causes of anxiety, frustration, sadness, concern. What's your sense of the reality of the situation we all find ourselves in, but also this interplay between our inner lives and our outer world?
Oh, it's huge. So, um, life has always been challenging for every human who's ever walked the earth, one way or another. And these days, we have some unique challenges heading toward unique catastrophes, also with, happily, unparalleled promise alongside unprecedented peril. So that's kind of context. In that context, absolutely, we should do all that we can to help the world be better in whatever means we have, including in our own little circle. And meanwhile, we need to cope with the challenges of the world. The major factor of successful coping, which for me must include a growing deepening of well-being along the way, are inner strengths of various kinds. It's through developing inner strengths of various kinds and using them that we're able to cope with difficulty and heal and grow ourselves. So I'm a psychologist. I'm very aware of the importance of activism in the outer world, and I've been engaged increasingly in that domain. But mainly, I look to what also we can do alongside social action inside ourselves. And the place do we always have to start? For me, there's kind of a 1, 2, 3 sequence. Um, Deal with the bad. Whatever, I use the word bad pragmatically. What's painful? What's difficult? You have to start with what you feel. That's the foundation of mindfulness. There's no traction for any kind of lasting release or growth except on that foundation of being with whatever is the truth of your experience right now. That's absolutely foundational. Now we can be with it skillfully, holding it in mindful spaciousness, getting an inch away or 20 feet away from the movie of our emotional reactions at the time, not to deny it or to suppress it, but to get some space around it, some shock absorbers, some buffers around it. We start there. But after we've been with our experience a bit, understandably, then we need to work with it through both releasing what's difficult, challenging, upsetting, not skillful, not helpful, and also especially growing the good inside ourselves for our own sake and that for others. So for me, there's kind of three things here: deal with the bad, turn to the good. That is also true, which actually helps you deal with the bad even better. And third, take in the good. Deal with the fact that your brain is a slow learner. It's a rapid learner for the crud of life. That's its negativity bias, like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good ones. It learns that stuff really fast. A person makes a nasty comment to you, goes right in, right? But someone says something nice to you or is caring and kind to you, or you realize something good about yourself, yeah, whatever. Washes through the brain like water through a sieve. So it's especially important to take in the good for a breath or longer when it's authentically arrived for you. So for me, those three go together. And
Mm.
anything we say about growing the good inside yourself is in the context of a very clear eyed seeing of the real challenges in this life.
Yes, and in the context of those challenges, I'm feeling that we need a combination of softness, but also some kind of strength to be able to uh, respond
Yeah.
wisely. But I think before we dive into any of that anymore, I know you're a wonderful teacher and you have various practices, and I wondered if I could invite you to take us through some kind of centering or breathing exercise that we could do right here, right now, just to help us all build a little bit more of that sort of inner calm and wisdom that you've just been referring to.
I'd be really happy to do that. And um, before I say that, before I go through that, I just want to say first, you are going right after what's really matters most, which is experience. Ideas are useful, fine, but they're most useful as guides into emotion, sensation, and action, are the embodied, enacted living of us. Most important. That's the real gold. And second, what's remarkable based on current neuroscience is that within a few seconds, certainly within a few breaths, you can start to initiate a process inside your own brain in which lasting traces of beneficial experiences are left behind in altered neural structure and function. You're changing your brain while you actually do this little practice we're about to do, which will take 2 minutes or so at the most. So you ready? Want to give it a whirl? Okay, great. Like any practice, adapt my suggestions to your own purposes, whatever is useful for you. We're going to focus on 3 breaths, 3 kinds of breaths. And if the breath is uncomfortable to attend to, it's really okay. You can just be aware of other parts of your body or maybe the room you're in as a whole and while doing the kind of breath and part, the and part that I'll take you through. Okay, here we go, and I'll do it with you. And after you learn this, you can just do it 1, 2, 3 breaths if you like, or you could take a little longer. All right, so here we go. Breathing while feeling your chest as a whole. Get a sense of your whole chest as a single field in which there are many sensations. Left and right together, front and back together. Attention tends to skitter from one thing to another. In this case, we're being aware of a whole field. And by the way, you can extend this practice to becoming aware of your body as a whole, not just your chest as a whole, if you like. Then in the second breath, breathing while feeling caring. We are gently inviting certain experiences to arise, gently, bringing to mind a pet, a friend, someone who's helped you along the way, perhaps putting a hand on your heart if you like, to kind of embody the experience even more. See what it's like to breathe while feeling caring. Focusing on the simple experience of feeling warm, kind, compassionate. And then in the third breath, breathing while feeling strong. Again, simple, focusing on the experience. Perhaps sitting up in a little more centered way, stabilizing yourself, not getting tense or aggressive, just grounded, stable, centered. Breathing while feeling strong. And then for a very interesting bonus, breathing while feeling strong and open-hearted. What's the combination, the blend of warm-heartedness and strength? For example, feeling both compassionate and kind while also feeling determined and committed. Warm-hearted strength sinking into you, spreading inside as you sink into it. Okay, 3 breaths. How was that?
Thank you, Rick. I was really struck by how different the experience was as you drew my attention to different things. I've been using mindfulness exercises for many years, and that focusing on the body and the breath felt really familiar. I guess I feel fortunate that it's something I've done before. The focusing on caring, I love, because when you bring that sense of loving kindness or compassion in, it does change the dynamic. You know, I visualize a loved one. But that final topic of sort of strength is really interesting, because I don't normally associate that with this kind of practice. So I'd love us to explore this idea of what does compassionate strength look like? Not aggressive, I would imagine. How would you just define compassionate strength? What does that mean?
I think it's helpful to imagine exemplars, whoever for you is that. Um, Lately, my wife and I are watching a TV show in America called The First Lady, about 3 American wives of presidents, Eleanor Roosevelt, Betty Ford, and Michelle Obama. All of them strike me as examples of compassionate strength, notably Michelle Obama, who's in my living memory. Also, pick your person, um, you know, Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, people who are models of this for us. That's a wonderful thing. Personally, we've all had experiences in which we were loyal to someone and determined on their behalf. That's a good example. And a little bit later, maybe we'll talk about being loyal to yourself and determined on your own behalf, taking that same stance and, being on your own side with regard to it. So those are examples of it. And I think for many people, it's pretty straightforward to be caring and kind. It's pretty straightforward to be assertive and, direct. But to put those together, that's the sweet spot, the strong heart.
What comes up for me when you say that is the way I feel as a parent towards a child, which is wanting so much the best for them that you're willing to kind of work hard to protect that and make the case for that and support them and stand up to things that might be challenging that, whether that's, the effect that social media can have or the way they're treated in a club or a school or something. So maybe part of the trick here is bringing that same sort of parental compassion to ourselves, being good parents to ourselves in a way. I get the sense that perhaps we're sometimes better at bringing that for others than we are for ourselves. Have you seen that too?
I definitely have seen that. And I want to, if I could, create a quick frame here, especially for people who have maybe something of a mindfulness background. There is an absolute place in practice for what's called choiceless awareness, typically in a meditative frame, sometimes in everyday life, where you just let the stream of consciousness roll on by while you're accepting it and witnessing it. Fantastic. And there's also a place throughout your day to deliberately mobilize certain states of mind, states of being, certain feelings, certain body sensations, certain intentions, certain perspectives. We activate certain states of being. Absolutely a place for that. And that's also the first step in cultivating and learning and developing these qualities inside yourself, turning states into traits. We grow traits other than what's baked into our DNA already by internalizing states of being. And then as we develop positive traits, that tends to foster these positive states, which then we can use to reinforce the traits. So to be really clear, I'm not talking about faking anything or positive thinking or fake it till you make it. I'm talking about the ordinary process of opening into learning, usually because we're already feeling something. When you're already feeling determined on behalf of someone, that's an opportunity to internalize that experience and to grow the trait of the strong heart, for example. So that's a very, very, very important, broad principle here. It's okay to do this. There's a famous saying from Milarepa, a great Tibetan sage 1,000 years ago, who was describing his own life of practice. He said, "In the beginning, nothing came. In the middle, nothing stayed. In the end, nothing left." That's the nature of practice. In the beginning, we try to feel something like, strength. Like, what? Forget it. Let alone strong heart, don't get it. All right, fine. Keep going, keep trying. Eventually, you'll have experiences of it. They're not yet a trait. You're not yet stabilized. established in that way of being, but you're on the way. Good job. And keep going. And then eventually, with repetition, that which you've called into being stays within inside you, hardwired into your nervous system, literally, and into the rest of your body as well. And then you take it with you wherever you go with a unconditional, unshakable core of resilient well-being and peacefulness, contentment, and love hardwired into you.
I really love that, because I'm often find that a practice that I learn or do in a safe space like this with a wise teacher feels really natural, and then I go back into normal life and it's harder
That's right.
to maintain that. So that idea of it being wired in through practice is important. There's a quote, I can't remember, I think a boxer once said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And of course, it feels like life is sometimes punching
Oh,
us in the
yeah.
face. So I wondered if we could bring what you've just said into the context of a world where people feel scared and
Oh, yeah.
anxious, and that's quite natural emotional signals coming from our body about,
Totally.
the difficulties we sense, the cost of living crisis, a war, climate
Sure.
change. How do those things interact?
So the punch lands. That was Mike Tyson, by the way. The punch
Yes, it was.
lands,
It was.
or the waves of life hit you. And understandably, there's often an initial period where you're just shocked. And as soon as you can, it helps to start to mobilize some mindfulness about it and some compassion for yourself. And just in the very beginning, something has happened, it's upsetting. You try to accept it, try not to beat yourself up about it, maybe try to see it in a larger context, but you're just being with it. And that alone is often enough. That's great. That's a great gift of mindfulness. And there's a lot more to practice than that, because there's also the opportunity to let go, to kind of let the feelings flow through you. You sort of gather your footing. You watch your mind. Your mind is catastrophizing about this, or it's blaming you about that, or it's making up a case about other people. And you realize that's just not good for me. Or maybe your mind is saying, hey, go get hammered tonight. Go have 3 beers, 6 at least. You deserve it. And you go, well, that's a tricky thought. I got to be careful about that. So you release problematic material. It kind of flows through you. And then you ask yourself, well, how do I want to cope with this? How do I want to practice? Here I am, I'm scared. Maybe I could take a breath and help my body, my poor little soft animal of the body, as the poet Mary Oliver put it, calm down a little. Maybe I could think about my friends or my allies and call them to mind, which is very helpful in the brain, which also will help me be centered. Maybe I could find my own heart, to get in touch with my own lovingness, my own good-heartedness, which also is very calming. Maybe I could find that kind of slightly pissed off, I'm not going to be defeated sense that I have from my, I don't know what. For me, it's rock climbing partly, the sense of determination, moxie. I don't know if you have that slang term in Great Britain, but moxie, feistiness. I'm not going to be beaten by this. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm not going to pretend this is not horrible. And I would start swearing now, but I try not to swear on these things. I'm going to keep going. Find these things, right? So that's the question, right? Life is incredible, wonderful. What an opportunity. And it has a lot about it that sucks. What are we going to do about it? Without
Rick, I
diminishing
heard
how
you.
sucky it is, what are you going to do about it?
It's the ultimate question, isn't it, really? I heard you say something which, when we last spoke, sort of describing the red zone that we so often sort of
Yeah.
instinctively feel when we
Yeah.
confront a difficult situation, and kind of what almost the antidote to that is. And I think you've touched on it in what you were saying just then. But do you want to say a bit more about sort of?
Oh,
I
yeah.
guess it's the fight or flight that we all know, but what's the alternative to that?
Yeah. And much as Miller Rep has said, as we accumulate practice, a breath here, a minute there, as we gradually accumulate that, we become more robust inside. There are thousands of studies, the evidence base for the development, the cultivation of resilience in its various aspects and well-being is enormously robust. Huge evidence for this. And you know it in your own bones. You don't have to read a scientific study. If you just keep helping yourself and internalize whatever's beneficial that you're feeling or calling forth inside your own mind, you will gradually grow. you will gradually heal. Sometimes it's helpful to have professional help and guidance. And, I do that for a living, but very much of this we do on our own. So you could trust that process. You really can. And what happens then is you start recovering more quickly. I think of it as a boat. I've sailed a little bit. I'm kind of a dangerous sailor because I probably don't know enough. I know enough to get into trouble. But anyway, and so the boat has a keel, right? Well, a boat without a keel is very vulnerable to flipping. And I capsized a boat with no keel. So that's a lesson. But as you develop these in yourself, your keel deepens. So as the waves get bigger, you get knocked less and you recover more rapidly. And that's what really happens. Now, when you get knocked, biologically, it's very easy to go into what's called, I call it the red zone, where fight, flight, freeze, essentially, where you feel challenged in one or more basic needs of safety, satisfaction, connection, and you go into fear, anger, helplessness for safety, or frustration, disappointment, addiction for satisfaction, or you go into hostility, shame, resentment, vengeance in terms of issues around connection. Okay. That's okay, but it's very stressful on the body long term. And the red zone's not a great way to cope. What's remarkable is to appreciate that we can deal with huge challenges to safety, satisfaction, and connection while staying in the green zone, centered in this growing quality of resilient well-being as your keel deepens in the water. We can stay centered in these places as we get challenged. And what happens is that as the challenges grow, you become more able to stay centered in the green zone, even though it's a big challenge. You might get knocked hard into the red zone for 5 minutes or an hour while you're sitting in the waiting room at the hospital, not knowing what's going to happen next, or dealing with the person who just betrayed you in your relationship, or your landlord has told you have to move in a week, or whatever it might be. But you recover more and more rapidly. That's Mother Nature's plan, by the way. That's why, as Robert Sapolsky's book is titled, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Because Mother Nature's plan is to spend most of our time in the green zone, hanging out, eating grass, or the human equivalent, rubbing up against our fellows, looking over our shoulders. Are the lions coming? Nah, we're okay. That's green zone living. And then there's a burst of stress. Maybe something happens that, as Sapolsky says in the wild, ends quickly, one way or another. And then whoop, the herd goes back to green zone, recovery. But modern life, we're in the red zone or the pink zone most of the time. We don't marinate in the green zone, and we don't draw on our green zone resources to come out of spikes of red zone stress very quickly. We kind of get stuck in them sometimes. So for me, I'm talking about reestablishing our healthy biological blueprint in the context of modern life that is an abnormal, bizarre, crazy departure from the blueprint for resilient well-being that our hunter-gatherer ancestors and their hominid ancestors acquired over several million years.
I love that zebra analogy, and I just it feels to me that some of the stuff that takes us into the red zone is an understandable response to actual stressors, and yet some of it is also that we're perhaps not very good at befriending ourselves, that some of this is an inner narrative that we either came from our formative years or has become a kind of response we have, and in fact is perhaps more about the internal narrative or the way we treat ourselves than it is about the actual world around us, where for many of us life isn't as dangerous as it was on the savannah in those kind of fight, flight, or freeze actual situations. So I guess, how can we get on our own side a bit more, Rick? How does that work?
Right. Yeah, and to be really clear, as we grow strengths inside, and as we call ourselves to practice with what we're feeling, it's extremely important that we don't use that to invalidate what we're feeling at the time, or to feel personally ashamed or embarrassed that, I thought I had a good meditation. I'm still very upset about certain things. What's wrong with me? It's very important. We can do both. We can both have a kindness and a tenderness that's gentle, an inner good parenting, an inner good friending with what we're feeling and how it's landed on us because of our biology and what we've learned and the ways that society has kicked us in the teeth. We can have tenderness about that while, after the initial shock wears off, in a friendly way, a supportive way, much like we would for a friend. Okay, this is crap. What would help? That would be wise. That would be helpful. What could we do? What can I do inside myself? Who could I reach out to? Are there actions to take? Or do I just ride out this storm? And that's the best I could do, and that's okay. But the two can go together. You can be kind and tender while also being a friend to yourself. So
I'd
that's
love
really
us
important.
to make this interactive with
Yeah.
the community who are here with us today, Rick. I wonder if we could invite each of us, you and me included, to think about that kind of question you just asked us, and really what can we do to be a friend to ourselves right now. So if you would like to contribute on the chat, everyone, maybe just have a moment to think about what could you do to befriend yourself right now, to cultivate more of that sort of being on your side and calm strength that Rick's talked about. So let's have a look. So people are saying eating healthily, stopping and breathing, being less hard on myself, having patience, drinking enough water, taking time, saying an affirmation, going for a walk, saying no, having some rest, singing out loud, focus on one thing at a time, pause, try to avoid saying I must, exercise, get outside, pray, self-massage, forgive myself, dancing, brush my teeth, stay with loved ones, being kind to myself, sleep more, cooking, yoga. Wow, what a list. How are you feeling as you see that all fly past?
That's great. And if I could, I'll nominate two more that I didn't hear. Uh,
Great.
yeah, the first of the two is to be encouraging to yourself.
Okay.
Encourage. This is hard. This is tough. I got to. I'm trying to get something done. I'm scared of something like public speaking, or I'm not very motivated to exercise. Encourage, which has the root of the word heart. Encourage, core, French, whatever, heart. So encourage. And the other one I would nominate is seeing the good in yourself, recognizing yourself as a basically good person. You don't need to be a saint to be a basically good person. Who is maybe still a work in progress, maybe a basically good person winces in healthy remorse when they think about some of the things they've done. I do. And still, to know that you're a basically good person, to bring that blessing to yourself.
I really love that. I think we often talk about this idea of a sort of um, loving kindness practice, or metta, as you might talk about in a Buddhist tradition and so on.
Mhm.
And yet something that's really simple about the idea of friendship towards
Yeah.
oneself, which I think makes it feel so much more accessible and down to earth. I was really shocked when I first worked with Kristen Neff about how much I could be friendly towards others I cared about, and yet the words I said to myself when I looked inside were not friendly at all. And actually, just being aware of that was step one for me to sort of trying to put that right.
Yeah.
Um, how do you practice this in your daily life, or what do you find helps in those moments of the red zone, Rick?
I make it a little bit of a game. I mean, been doing this for a while, so I'm interested in how quickly I can recover from contraction. And if you're aware of just what you're experiencing, right? Spacious flow, and that has this contraction around it, like whatever it might be, including with other people. Like my wife will say something, or she'll be a little directive, or, like ordering me around a little bit, then it pulls up my parental history and so it gets kind of interesting. How rapidly can you help that contracted whirlpool? I think of eddies in the stream as a fundamental metaphor for this reality, both mind and matter together, eddies in the stream. And you can have eddies within eddies within eddies, which are empty of solidity and essence and independent arising. They arise dependently. And that can be a deepening recognition. So I try to, as my practice is, how rapidly can I not form a contracted, upset eddy? And then if I have, how quickly can I pull out of it? That's one. I think a second one is I focus on trying to find love. That's been a huge practice. And it's really remarkable to appreciate that love is love, whether it flows out or in. And there are often limitations on how loving people are around us. You know, we wish they were different and better, but hello, there they are, all kinds of reasons. But there's no limitation on love as a broad range, including simple friendliness or respectfulness or appreciation. I think respect, appreciation, um, empathy, and compassion are very foundational. We don't have to like or approve of other people, including our adversaries, to have a feeling of common humanity that they suffer too. They're going to die also. They love their children. They don't want their children to go. You know, these normal universal qualities. We can see that in them. So I'd say that's also pretty quick in my practice and in a response to try to find that warm-hearted, well-wishing. You know, you can wish well.
And seeing as you've really brought this topic of kind of interconnectedness and our love and concern for each other, what about our willingness to seek help? Feels like, you know, we're looking at some fantastic practices to be good at self-help, but actually, and many of us bring a huge amount of compassion to wanting to help others. But I
Yeah.
feel that sometimes it's hard to be the one that says, I'd appreciate some help.
I think that's true. And when I talk about finding love, it's really finding something that is often very simple. And it's important to realize that one of the fastest ways out of the red zone is tapping into warm-heartedness. It's so calming and so strengthening and restorative in your body. And it's great to appreciate that, you know, we can't create others to be warm toward us, but we can always tap into that power ourselves, even if we feel correctly not loved enough, you know. And it's not like we're letting them off the hook for not loving us enough by growing that warm-heartedness inside ourselves, in part because it's really good for us. So I would say that reaching out to help is huge. You know, I'm just, you know, I was raised, you know, male socialization, America, um, and you know, you know, rugged individualist kind of thing. So I've had to work on the capacity to just vulnerably, wow, I need help. I can't do this. I can't do it. I think it's helpful really to reach out to wisdom teachings, which is extraordinary in our time. We have access to tools that were unthinkable 20 years ago, let alone 2000 years ago. So reaching out to those kind of tools, and as appropriate, getting professional help. I think people often underutilize sources of professional help, partly because they maybe feel embarrassed or they don't feel assertive or they're not allowed to be assertive. And, you know, those people are there to help you and push them to do it.
Mm. And
Yeah.
I love remembering that, of course, when we invite others to help us, we're also giving them
Yeah.
a chance to find the joy that comes from helping as well. So
Yeah.
it's almost an act of
If I want to,
kindness to reach out for help in a way.
yeah. And I want to really add an important point here too, which is here I am. I'm a tall, white, professional man. And I have a lot of advantages that are conferred on me by disadvantaging others. That's flat out true. And so that means it's a lot easier when I speak up in a doctor or physician's office who's been blowing my wife off because she's a woman. It's unfair that that person will listen to me more. But that's a fact of it. So I want to be really clear that when I talk about, you know, asking for help, I recognize my privilege. I try to, or I have a growing recognition that's still inadequate, you know, of that privilege. And I just want to acknowledge it. It's a lot easier for people who look like me to do what I'm saying. And I just thoroughly want to honor that, both in terms of what we're dealing with structurally, systemically in the moment, and also the internalization of 1,000 episodes of being disempowered and dismissed and devalued and punished often for daring to speak up. So thoroughly want to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Rick. It's a really important point. I'm so grateful for you raising that. And I'd love
Yeah.
to come on to now some questions from our fantastic community.
Yeah.
Alex asked something which I think is a question I feel I'd love to ask myself every day. But he says, what can we best encourage others to do to contribute to a more compassionate world? How do we bring this sense of caring that you've brought to us tonight out into the
Ah.
world around us?
Well, at that biggest level, I think what we need to do is take a page out of the hunter-gatherer book, in which basically a band of 40 or 50 people would come together and the many would regulate the few. in a nutshell. The many would make sure that there was common welfare, truth, and justice. So I think that's at the largest scale, and to encourage people to do that, absolutely. Second, the way to encourage others is to model it yourself, which is humbling and brings us home to what's at. And then I find for a lot of people, it's inspiring to them to see the good in them witnessed by someone else. And I'm reminded of a American television person who was a wonderful teacher. I think him as an American saint, Frank Rogers, Mr. Rogers. And he talked about how we have all been loved into being by someone, typically multiple someones. We can love others into being in much the same way ourselves, including in little and very authentic and simple, everyday, in the flow ways of seeing the good in them and, in effect, helping to love them into being and loving into being the qualities in them that we hope to encourage, such as compassion and justice, both of which walk side by side. We need both of them.
Thank you. Matt has asked, or has observed, that he's dealing with problems at work and feels that's dragging into his personal life too. So do you have any tips or techniques how to deal with that problem and the effect it has on your well-being? I guess that sort of challenge of work stress broadening into other areas of life.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be a little, this is Coach Rick speaking here a little bit, but there's no replacement for attentional control. That was what I mean by that is attention is like a spotlight and vacuum cleaner. It illuminates what it rests upon and then sucks it into our brain through what's called experience dependent neuroplasticity. So learning to regulate attention so you can leave work at work so it doesn't invade you is really important. General mindfulness training is really helpful. Second, I think really shoring up the resources at home. Resources need to rise to challenges. So if understandably your job is insane, your boss is a maniac, nobody supports you, you because of downsizing, now you're doing the jobs of 2.5 people, and they, are still paying you the same. They didn't increase your salary by 250%, so there you are. It's real. It's going to have an overflow. So you need to raise resources of various kinds: respite, social support, calming your body, eating some ice cream, whatever. You need to raise the resources. Really, really, really important. That's a general thing. And then the other thing I'll just leave you with is, because I do have a business background, I've been in the business world, and work is overrated. I'm a guy who does a lot of work, and all the rest of that. But a lot of, company jobs, they're using you for their purposes, and being crystal clear about that. And so you can kind of bound it, keep it separate. Last thing I'll just say is oftentimes work manipulates us by appealing to our narcissistic injuries. What I mean by that lingo is that because most of us, me included, are vulnerable to feeling inadequate because of our childhoods and others. The normal, healthy social supplies that should come in when you're young are like a thin soup, like breathing through a straw. You don't die, but it's not enough. So then you walk into adulthood, as I did, with a hole in your heart, a big hole. As we fill that hole in healthy ways, by having experiences of being included or seen or valued or appreciated, prized, and loved in authentic ways, a breath at a time, you can gradually fill that. So then you become less easy to manipulate by the, disapproval of, the powers that be at work. And this goes to a larger point. The personal and the political are connected, and it's a two-way street. As we grow the personal inside, as you get 1 billion brains in the green zone every day, most minutes of most days, that's my wish, 1 billion brains on green. Wouldn't that change the course of human history? It doesn't have to be perfect. We'll still argue, we'll still compete. Two people will still want the same partner, and it'll be complicated, but we'll be in the green zone most of the time. When that happens, the historic forces of demagogues and authoritarian tyrants and greed hog advertisers, they bounce off more because you're just more established in your own well-being, and you're not hungry for more, and you're not easy to manipulate and bully. So as we grow the personal, we become more effective at the political as well. And this right here is an example of that.
Rick, that was one of those kind of shiver down the spine moments for me, that idea of 1 billion people in the green zone, and just thinking about how many of the challenges our world faces would sort of not go away completely, but would
Yeah,
just be disarmed somewhat by that calmer,
yeah,
more wise and compassionate way of being. How wonderful. Let's keep working towards that. I think one of the things that many of us recognize underpins emotional difficulties is what's happened to us in our formative years. And there's a really
yeah.
interesting question here from CK, who said, do you think that we have difficulty thinking of ourselves in a loving, caring, and compassionate way because of the messaging we may have received in our youth? For example, thinking that, that thinking of ourselves is a selfish thing to do.
100%. I mean, 100%. And the the brain is designed to be changed by our experiences, especially negative experiences, especially those involving other people, particularly negative experiences involving other people in childhood. And the younger, the greater the impact. So it's understandable that we carry that with us today. People sometimes beat themselves up. Why am I so bothered by my childhood? Or other people beat us up. Why are you still bothered by your childhood? Because I'm designed to be bothered by it. Hello, welcome Mother Nature, welcome biology. So, of course, we're affected by it. And then, big breath. It is what it is. What do you want to do about it? How can you help yourself a minute or 2 or 10 a day to gradually heal that and work with it and so forth? And there are many, many skillful means now for doing that, and you could stick with it. I'm still a little triggered occasionally, and I've been at this for about 50 years now, for real. But still, it gets much, much less. You remember what happens, but the charge on it disappears. And you become more and more stabilized in a good place and less preoccupied, less and less invaded by those early life experiences. You become freer and you expand the range of experiences in which you're free, rested in peacefulness, contentment, and love in the green zone.
Rick, you've shared so many sort of practical ways we can try and live this and develop this. So I think the how and what we might do, the mindset we're trying to cultivate has come across really clearly. But there's a question here from Scherzo, which I think gets to a slightly different angle about sort of the motivation to keep going, if you like. So the question is simply, what's the best way to keep motivated to practice self-compassion? It's all very well knowing what the thing is and trying it once or twice. How do we make that last?
That's great. And I think there are two ways to be motivated, basically, which are in general. So one way is kind of top down. And we just remind ourselves to keep going. We put little rewards in front of us to keep going. We arrange our life that supports practice as best we can in the real world. The second way to motivate ourselves is more fundamental, and it takes less effort. It's to give over to the good that is already within you. And that's an extremely important point. Even as I talk about cultivating strengths of different kinds of learning and releasing what's problematic, it's so important to appreciate that the context of that is your native goodness already. Your natural being already is enough and fine. And when you get in touch with that layer, that depth in yourself, it's kind of the field or the space, the container of everything else, you realize, hey, I'm all right already. And so it's okay to do both. We're gradually changing the brain for the better. It's real. It needs, cultivation. It needs help in a context, hopefully, of staying in touch with what is already beautiful and perfect and wise inside yourself. As you are in touch with that, it naturally moves you in being more and more that way. It's kind of like opening out or falling backward into a beautiful, warm river of who you already are and letting that current carry you along rather than feeling like you have to swim stressfully, against the current.
I love these visual metaphors. They're really powerful. Rick, I think of myself as a realistic optimist. I'm someone who likes to cultivate hope, but I'm also sort of pragmatic and aware that life is full of imperfections, and I'm full of imperfections as well. And sometimes I find myself going into a spiral of loss of hope. So I had a wonderful session with two colleagues who I love dearly today, talking about our perspectives on climate change and how we're feeling about the sort of climate anxiety and looking ahead and what that means for our planet that we love so much and future generations. And that's a really difficult conversation to have. And yet I'm still someone that wants to cultivate, a hope. And so it brings me to a question from someone who's just put the initials SF, so I'm not sure what their name is, but they said, do you have any recommendations for building self-belief, but also, and I love this phrase, believing everything will work out? I mean, is that even a realistic belief to have? And if so, how do we keep that sort of realistic hope?
Uh, One way that I want to underline, and it's very neurological, is whenever you're experiencing something that for you is personally valuable, it's meaningful, it's enjoyable, you want to help it sink in. One thing that will help it sink in and literally make changes in your brain is to focus on what is rewarding about it, what feels good about it, or is personally relevant about it. So, to answer the previous question about motivation, keep noticing, and it's okay to take pleasure. The Buddha, who was very willing to encourage ascetic, renunciate practices, had a line that it's important to find gladness in your goodness as a kind of summary translation. Enjoy it, enjoy the ride. So then, second, realistic hope. Um, I think as a realist, there's no way around seeing what already is baked into climate change. And I'm not a scientist. I don't produce much science, but I consume a lot of it, and it's crystal clear from the science. Our best hope, which is the hope still, is that we can cap global warming at 3 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. That's the best we can probably do, barring an extraordinary miracle. And I encourage people to read a piece from Yuval Harari, Harari, in the New York Times, in which he talks about spending 2% of gross domestic product, which is $1.7 trillion a year, to cap climate change within the range of bad, but not catastrophic, right? That's our best hope. So I think we have to be realistic about it. On the other side of it, holy moly, rise of the middle class worldwide, growing, long overdue, power of women and other groups that have been historically discriminated against, rise in civil society, growing science, education, internet, growing access to psychological tools of various kinds, and a worldwide sense increasingly of enough. This is crazy. This is messed up. We need to change the basic program of life in the 21st century and return to some kind of economy that focuses on well-being. We need to place compassion and justice at the foundation of every society. That's galvanizing. That's galvanizing. And I think there's a lot of force in the world today in all kinds of quarters, including from entertainment and young people and around the world, that is basically saying, hey, it's time to make a world that works for everybody, not just some of us. And I'm
Well
really
said.
hopeful about that.
Yeah, I'm hopeful about that too. And you've left me feeling more hopeful about it from the way you've just framed that, Rick. In a moment, I want to come to a couple of the projects you're working on and resources people can use as a follow-up, because I know you've got so many helpful things. But my colleague Sarah has just kindly alerted me to something that's going on in the chat, which I hadn't seen, but a few people asking, how can we help someone else, like a spouse or someone around us who's aggressive or angry and needs some kind of help, but they're not sort of willing to reach out for that help?
Yeah,
How can we bring this to people who aren't necessarily open to it?
great. I think the first thing, as long as it's safe for you to do it, is to resource yourself. That's kind of a fancy lingo, but to kind of find that maybe warm-hearted strength. You can imagine a shield around you if you need to. I do. Shields up, Scotty, and then offer that other person deep listening without an agenda, if only for a few minutes in a row. I mean, just imagine what it feels like for you when someone listens to you for 5 minutes straight and really maybe ask a question to understand even more deeply, not to challenge you, but to really hear you fundamentally. Most people don't receive that. And when we get that full listening, most of the time, in most people, then there becomes a space for change. A few people, when they get that full listening, if they're like an addict, they want to shoot me up again, get that full listening again. But most people, like a kind of settling occurs because they haven't gotten that full listening before, including sometimes a chance to fully listen to themselves. But then when they get it, then there's maybe an invitation. What would you like to do about that? How could I help? What do you wish would be so out in the world, and especially inside your own mind? And then you see what people are willing to do, and be realistic. A lot of people are actually not that willing to grow for whatever reason. And maybe it doesn't feel safe for them. So you watch and watch. But from the standpoint of being spacious and being an ally to them, instead of over here yelling at them or being like a brick wall over here, now you're over here. You're with them, looking at their life together in a way that's supportive, without waiving your rights, without letting yourself be mistreated, protecting yourself. Paradoxically, fences make for good neighbors, as the proverb puts it. So if you feel settled and autonomous in your own being, you can actually give people more of that intimate friendship or friendliness with them.
Rick, you've been so generous with your wisdom, and that's been such an amazing amount that you've shared with us in this short time. We're out of time, sadly, but before we close, I wanted to invite you to say a little bit about the Global Compassion Coalition, which I'm delighted that Action for Happiness is keen to be involved with. And you've done so much to help people individually, as we have with all of us tonight. But I sense that you're working on a bigger mission to bring this more globally, as the name suggests. So, what is this Global Compassion Coalition?
It's an answer to the question of what will it take to have a world that works for everybody, not just some of us. What will it take? And I think what it will take in part is a large scale coalition of millions, potentially billions of people and organizations worldwide who want to put compassion and justice at the foundation of all societies and are seriously working toward that with their eyes on the prize of what life is like by the end of the century. That's within range. I don't think I'll make it to the end of the century, but I think my kids might. And if they ever have kids, I think their grandkids will make it there. It's not that far away. It's, the end of the century. So we have established a Global Compassion Coalition. Go to globalcompassioncoalition.org to see an initial website about it. And we're just building from here to help people who are involved with the science, the education, the application, and the advocacy of compassion to do what they do even better. And then building on that to mount a multi-year, multi-decade probably influence campaign in culture and politics to establish compassion and justice in a serious way. And then building on that with allies, go after a major flagship project that's worth doing in its own right, like ending the hunger, neglect, and abuse of all children worldwide, or capping climate change at just 3 degrees Fahrenheit worldwide, which is bad enough, but no worse, right? Work on a flagship project that's worth doing in its own right, but which necessarily leaves civil society in its wake, which is the fundamental issue. If we have a fundamental issue of governance that began when agriculture came to town, and it's been Game of Thrones for most people, kind of more or less ever since. We need to restore common truth, common welfare, and common justice as they were in hunter-gatherer bands in which we've lived 97% of our time, restoring common truth, welfare, and justice at the foundational level, because that's the basis for governing ourselves in ways that work for everybody and have been hijacked by concentrations of wealth and power over the last 10,000 years, blowing up common truth, common welfare, and common justice. So that's our hope, and we're serious about it. We're aspirational, but we're serious as I don't know what. We're serious about it, and we need your help, because it's by being big that we will accomplish big things. Humanity has never come together at this scale, but now in the 21st century, through the internet and other means, we have the opportunities to do that across divisions, across nations, across ethnicities, and all the rest of that. We have the opportunity as us to come together as a whole human tribe to make a better world.
Yeah, well said, Rick. And this Action for Happiness community is all about individuals getting together to create a happier and kinder world together. So please consider us absolutely on board with what you've just laid out there. It's fantastic. And I wanted to say a big thank you to you for your wisdom and time today, and also huge thanks to everyone who's participated. Really fantastic engagement in the chat. Great questions. Rick, this theme has been resilient well-being. Is there a final thought you'd like to leave us with as we part today?
Well, first, let me say thank you to you, Mark, and the whole team, Sarah, and all the rest, and also all these fantastic participants. And I'll just leave you with a proverb, which for me is profoundly hopeful. It goes to what I call the law of little things. Here's this proverb: think not lightly of good, saying, it will not come to me. Drop by drop, is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills oneself with good.
What a
That's our
beautiful,
opportunity.
beautiful,
Yeah.
opportunity for all of us, and lovely way to end this time. Thank you so much, Rick. Keep up the great work. We'll be sending around links to all your fantastic opportunities, and particularly the Global Compassion Coalition tomorrow. So thank you, everyone. Let's see you again at one of these events very soon.